He was just another man heading home after work. Briefcase in hand, suit pressed, nothing out of the ordinary. But for one officer, none of that mattered. To him, Marcus wasn't a professional, a father, or a leader. He was simply a black man walking the street at night, and that alone was reason enough to stop him. What began as a routine commute turned into a confrontation that could have ended in disaster. But what the officer didn't know was that the man he tried to humiliate carried more power than he could ever imagine. The question is, who really held the authority that night? The city was alive with its usual rhythm. Cars weaving through crowded intersections, neon lights flickering above convenience stores, and pedestrians moving quickly, each lost in their own world. For Marcus, it was just another evening after a long day at the office. He carried himself with calm confidence, his suit neatly pressed, his briefcase steady in his hand. To most, he looked like any other professional heading home, eager to trade the noise of the streets for the quiet of his living room. But Marcus was more than what met the eye. Years of discipline and dedication had shaped him into a man who carried quiet authority, the kind that didn't need to be spoken aloud. He had faced his share of obstacles, many born not from his abilities, but from the color of his skin. And yet, he had risen, carving out a place for himself in a system that wasn't designed to welcome him. To his neighbors, Marcus was the reliable man who left early and returned late, always nodding politely as he passed by. To his colleagues, he was a figure of respect, measured, thoughtful, unwilling to be rattled. But to the world beyond those circles, he was still just another black man walking the streets at night. And that simple truth was about to place him in a moment of danger he hadn't asked for. As Marcus crossed the intersection, the faint sound of tires caught his attention. A patrol car slowed beside him, headlights washing over his frame. He adjusted his briefcase and kept walking, unaware that this routine commute was about to turn into something far more sinister. What he didn't yet know was that the man behind the wheel wasn't looking at his suit, or his composure, or his years of service. He was only looking at his skin. The squad car slowed to a crawl, its tires humming against the asphalt. Marcus felt the light on his back. Sharp, unblinking, unmistakable. He had walked this street hundreds of times. Yet tonight, something was different. The cruiser's engine purred low, deliberate, like a predator circling its prey. Then came the flash of red and blue. The lights erupted, bathing the street in an artificial glow. A voice crackled through the loudspeaker, cold and commanding. "You! Stop right there!" Marcus froze. His heart thudded, not from guilt, but from the weight of recognition. He had heard stories like this before, seen too many names become hashtags, too many families broken by moments that spiraled out of control. He adjusted his grip on the briefcase, steadying his breath. He had done nothing wrong. Yet, in this moment, innocence didn't guarantee safety. The officer stepped out, heavy boots striking the pavement. His hand hovered near his holster, eyes narrowing as they scanned Marcus up and down, not his clothes, not his composure, but his skin. "Where you heading this late?" the officer barked, his tone already laced with suspicion. Marcus answered calmly, voice steady, rehearsed almost. "Just heading home from work." But the officer wasn't listening. His gaze darted to the briefcase, his lips curling into a smirk. "What's in the bag?" Marcus felt a prickle of heat rise in his chest. He knew how dangerous this dance could be. The fine line between compliance and dignity, between survival and humiliation. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted the briefcase, setting it on the hood of the car. The metallic clink echoed louder than it should have, drawing the eyes of passers-by who began to linger, curious but cautious. The officer snapped the latch open, rifling through papers and files without permission. Pages scattered, carried briefly by the wind before settling against the asphalt. Important documents, confidential reports stamped with official seals, lay exposed in the street. Marcus's jaw tightened. Every instinct told him to speak, to protest. But he swallowed the words. "Not yet, not here." He bent down quietly to retrieve a file, his hands trembling, not with fear of guilt, but with fear of what one wrong move might trigger. Behind him, the officer scoffed. Late at night, carrying files, acting nervous. "Doesn't look right to me." His words carried, loud enough for the small crowd now forming at the corner. Marcus could feel their eyes, the silent witnesses, some sympathetic, some indifferent, some recording with their phones. Every second stretched, the tension thick enough to choke on. The officer squared his shoulders, his voice rising with authority. "You fit the description. Hands where I can see them." Marcus raised his hands slowly, the briefcase still dangling from his fingers. His pulse thundered in his ears. He knew this was the moment where things often went wrong, where lives could be shattered in the span of a heartbeat. The officer stepped closer, his shadow overlapping Marcus's. His hand twitched near his weapon, his voice dripping with arrogance. "What are you hiding? Who do you think you are?" Marcus exhaled, steady but sharp. In that instant, he realized the truth. The man confronting him didn't know. He had no idea who stood before him, no idea how dangerous this humiliation would prove, not for Marcus, but for the officer himself. The air grew heavier, the crowd leaned closer, and the moment balanced on a knife's edge. Because what the officer didn't yet know was that the man he was trying to strip of dignity wasn't just another face in the crowd. He was someone whose authority reached further than this street, someone who had the power to turn this moment into the officer's greatest mistake. The officer's hand hovered near his holster, his posture stiff, his eyes sharp with suspicion. The crowd around them had grown larger, a sea of faces illuminated by the flashing red and blue. Phones were raised, recording every second. And yet, none of it seemed to matter to the man in uniform. His authority felt absolute. "Hands higher!" he barked, stepping closer, the steel edge in his voice cutting through the night. Marcus complied, his palms open against the glow of headlights. He stood still, calm on the outside, but inside his heart raced. Not from guilt, but from the suffocating knowledge of how quickly moments like these could spiral. The officer rifled again through the papers he'd scattered, his brows furrowed at the stamps, the signatures, the language of internal documents. "What's this supposed to be?" he sneered. "Looks fake to me. Some kind of stunt." He held one page up to the light, mocking, dismissive. Marcus's jaw clenched. He had spent his life building integrity, climbing the ranks, fighting battles no one saw. And here he was, reduced to nothing more than a target of prejudice, stripped of dignity in front of strangers. The officer took a step closer, his voice dripping with disdain. "Men like you think you can fool the system, but I see right through you." His hand twitched on his holster again, a gesture more of intimidation than necessity. The crowd gasped, a ripple of fear passing through the air. Marcus locked eyes with him. His voice, steady but firm, broke the silence. "You should look closer before you decide who I am." The officer froze for a split second, confusion flickering across his face. He looked again at the papers, the official seals, the signatures. Then realization struck. The man he had stopped, the man he had humiliated, wasn't a suspect. He was the head of internal affairs, the very authority that policed men like him. A hush fell over the street. The power dynamic flipped in an instant. What had begun as an act of arrogance now teetered on the edge of ruin, and as the weight of his mistake sank in, the officer's face drained of color. The silence that followed was deafening. The officer's arrogance dissolved, his confidence replaced by the unmistakable chill of fear. He had tried to strip Marcus of his dignity, to reduce him to nothing more than a stereotype, but instead, he had exposed his own prejudice in front of an entire crowd. Marcus lowered his hands slowly, not in defeat, but in quiet authority. He gathered the scattered papers, one by one, his movements deliberate, steady. The officer stood frozen, his earlier bravado shattered. And though Marcus could have lashed out, could have humiliated him in return, he chose restraint. Not because he wasn't angry, he was, but because he understood that real power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply stands unshaken in the face of injustice. The crowd murmured, phones still raised, the truth captured from every angle. In that moment, Marcus's identity was no longer just a shield for himself. It was a mirror, reflecting the deep flaws in a system where skin color still invited suspicion, even for the man tasked with protecting it. As Marcus walked away, briefcase in hand, the weight of the encounter lingered. He had endured humiliation not because of what he'd done, but because of who he was. And though he left with his head held high, the question burned quietly inside him. How many others, without his title, without his authority, would have walked away from that night? This wasn't just his story. It was the story of countless men and women who faced suspicion, disrespect, and danger simply for existing in their own skin. His rank had saved him. But what about those who didn't wear titles, who couldn't produce credentials to force recognition? The truth is clear. Racism doesn't vanish in the light of authority. It hides in plain sight, waiting to surface. And until it is challenged, it will continue to strip dignity, to silence lives, to break families. So the question remains, how many more Marcuses must it take before justice isn't determined by skin color, but by humanity? And when that moment comes, will we speak up, or will we stay silent?